My name is Joe Bianca. I'm the associate editor of the Thoroughbred Daily News. I'm also the host of TDN's Writer's Room podcast. This is the first episode of Bettor Things with Joe Bianca. In this show, we'll be having one-on-one, in-depth conversations with some of the handicapping world's brightest minds. We'll ask them about wagering strategies, how they got into the world of horse racing or even sports betting, and we'll ask them about life as a whole just to get to know who they are. In this first episode, we talked to David Aragona, who's a very, very sharp horse racing handicapper. He's the morning line maker for NYRA. He's also a host of a podcast for Timeform US and a handicapper for Timeform US and DRF. We had a great conversation. We're thrilled to have you watching the show, and maybe a little bit later on, I'll give you a little Derby future wager. Check out our interview with David. So I'm so thrilled to welcome my first guest on this show, Bettor Things with Joe Bianca. As a fellow podcast host, but he's so much more than that. He's the morning line maker for NYRA. He's a sharp handicapper for Daily Racing Form, Timeform US. David Aragona, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to having a chat.
Great to have you. Honestly, the reason I wanted to have you on first is I feel like on the surface level, we have a lot of things in common. We're young, New York-based guys. We're handicappers. I wouldn't compare myself to you as a handicapper, but I feel like I don't know that much about you. So let's start with that. Let's start with how you got into horse racing. What's your origin story for being a horse player?
I mean, I feel like my origin story is pretty typical. Started going to the races with my dad, the cliche, when I was a very young kid. Actually, my dad and his brother, my uncle, were both into races since they were in their mid-20s. They both went to college together, and they had like a college roommate that one day asked them if they wanted to go see a horse race. It happened that the first horse race their college roommate took them to was Secretariat's Belmont Stakes. Wow. So that was their introduction to horse racing. Obviously, they were hooked from that moment. So they were like really into the races all through like the late 70s, early 80s. And I started going with my dad when I was a young kid, like growing up in the early to mid 90s. And it just kind of stuck. I learned a lot of the handicapping principles from him, and that allure of like picking the winners of races and betting like $2-4 on a race when I was a kid. It just kind of stuck and really interested me. And, I went to college for other things and kind of put it on the back burner for a little while, but it was always a hobby, and it just kind of like accidentally turned into my career.
Was there one score that maybe gave you the bug and got you hooked? Because I always tell people this. I had the trifecta when Funny Side won the Derby, and I was like 16 years old, and it paid $600, which to a 16-year-old is all the money you could possibly want. So to me, that whole summer, I was just like, how do I do that again? Was there one score that you had?
I guess we were both Funny Side stands. I bet him in the initial future wager that year when he was, I think, 93-1. I just like loved his New York bred races from when he was a 2-year-old, and I bet him in that, and like he ended up winning the Derby. So I thought, oh, this is so easy. No, yeah, I mean, that definitely got the bug going in me a little bit. And more so in later years, like multi-race bets, really getting into that. I had a really big Travers day the year that Will Take Charge won. I think I hit the pick 4 that day, paid like $6,000 or something. So that kind of like really, got me more interested in doing more with the handicapping around that time, like 2012, 2013. And that's when I started blogging about races a lot. And that kind of led to what I do now.
Well, you just led me into my next question too, because I feel like you kind of did this the hard way to get to where you are. It's for real. Like you had your blog. You just kind of organically, I think, became known for having a good opinion with your Horse to Watch blog and your Twitter account. That's how I came to know you before you started working for Timeform and DRF. But did you always know once you started that blog that you wanted to do this, or was that just kind of a hobby that turned into a career?
I didn't know I wanted to do exactly what I'm doing now. I never thought I'd be a morning line maker specifically. Coming out of college, I graduated in 2010, and I just had like a couple of those years where I was like confused. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was just like in that lull period where I was just trying to find something that really like I was passionate about beyond just a day-to-day job. So I didn't really have any friends that were my age that were into horse racing. Right. So, I got on Twitter and I noticed that there was this whole horse racing community that I might be able to tap into or meet people. I was new to Twitter. I didn't really get it. So I figured, okay, I've got to like start a blog to like have something to link to so I can get my thoughts out there. And, I just started doing that, I think in 2012 for like an entire year. I had probably like 10 readers a day. Like nobody was paying any attention. But I did it like every night for the New York races, basically very similar to what I do now. And I would just be disciplined about it and just try to put something out there because I figured if I had like enough of a body of work and if I did a good job, like maybe finally somebody would notice. Because I guess like in the back of my mind, I wanted to get more embedded in the racing industry somehow, just be doing something. I didn't know exactly what. I just knew that this was my passion and I wanted to get connected with somebody that was as passionate as me that could maybe give me an opportunity. So I kept doing that. I had this like really big day at the end of my first year blogging. It was late in the Aqueduct meet when I think I wrote up 3 races that day. I typically like wrote up 3 or 4 races every day where I like highlighted horses that I thought were interesting. And all 3 of them won. One of them was 50-1. Another one was 75-1. And that like got people noticing. And my views on the website like shot up by tenfold after that. I guess like some word of mouth happened. So yeah, from there, it just kind of kept going on like an upward trajectory. And, got opportunities from a few people in the racing industry. Actually, one of the first people that reached out to me and like said, I want to get you working in the racing industry was Andy Serling. He just like invited me to lunch one day in the city, and I was like totally starstruck because I had been following him and like emulating what I do after his analysis for so many years. And he told me like, I don't have any opportunities for you right now, but like I'll just listen, see if anything opens up. I have a lot of connections in the industry and maybe something eventually will happen. And I'm sure it was indirectly. I don't think Andy directly recommended me, but Mike Beer used to do the Timeform US analysis back in like 2014, 2015. And when he got hired by the Daily Racing Form, that position kind of opened up. And Mark Attenberg, who created Timeform US and is now with the Racing Form, he gave me the opportunity. I think he had heard about me from Andy a little bit. And that's how it happened.
A couple of really sharp guys, obviously, Andy and Mike. Is Andy ever kind of a jerk to you? Because I know Andy. I go way back with Andy. I go back to him since I was a teenager. I don't know if you know, but Steve Bick has this website, Derby Trail. And it was like a forum that a bunch of us were on. And he kind of took an interest in me early on. But that interest was like part praise and part mentorship and part being a jerk and bullying me a little bit. And he kind of baptized me by fire that way. Was he always nice to you?
Yeah, I guess it kind of goes against his like image that he puts out there. So maybe I shouldn't say it, but like he's actually like a really nice person who's interested in fostering some talent. Like he really likes to give opportunities to younger people that are passionate about the industry. And I feel like I was one of them. So that's something that I feel like a lot of people aren't aware about him because he kind of has that curmudgeonly persona on Twitter and in all the analysis he does. But
he's a curmudgeon with a heart of gold. That's like he's that stereotypical type character. You mentioned you don't really have that many friends who watch racing or into racing. I think that's kind of a shared issue that we have as young handicappers. Like none of my friends watch racing, and I know it's so old timey where you even tell somebody you're like I'm into horse racing. They're like, what? That's still a thing. So like, have you ever even tried to like get some of your friends into racing? Have you taken them to the track? Like, what's that experience been for you?
Oh yeah, when I was going all the way back when I was like 10 years old, I had a racing birthday party where all my friends came to the Meadowlands. My dad had to like get all the parents to sign permission slips that they were okay with going into like a wagering environment. And if he wanted to know if it was okay, if they brought $20 and they could all bet some money on the races. So that didn't really stick with them though. I think they didn't quite get it. But no, like in later years, I've taken friends to the races different times. And there have been positive experiences, some less so. It's often comes down to whether or not you win money if you're new at the racetrack. That can kind of determine if you have a good time or a bad time. But no, like I know a few people that are my age that have been at least gotten more curious about it just through knowing me and talking to me.
I always tell people like if you want to experience racing at its best is to go to Saratoga. Because people will express like an initial interest to me and say like, when you're going out to Belmont, like take me with you. And I'm like, I don't know that you want to come out to Belmont or Aqueduct, and be there with 300 people in the entire facility. If you want to go to somewhere where it's really lively and there's a racing culture, then come to Saratoga. But it's hard. It's hard to get people to come that 3.5 hour trip from the city. So are you from the city initially?
I'm actually from northern New Jersey, probably
Okay.
like 10, 15 miles outside of New York City. So I was always kind of in the tri-state area growing up.
Gotcha. Did you go to college in the city?
Yeah, I went to NYU for
Oh,
undergrad. I only did undergrad, so yeah.
tip my cap to you, sir. It's impressive to be an NYU grad in any way. So yeah, so you think your future is always going to be a New York-based horse racing guy, or do you have like other things that you would want to do in this game, or even outside of the game?
Yeah, I don't know for sure. I mean, I'm kind of married to doing the New York stuff right now with the morning line gig. It takes up so much of my time. I don't really have the option to spend that much time looking at other tracks.
Yeah.
I mean, I do a little bit for some of the stuff the videos I have to do for DRF and things like that. But I have to kind of be very New York focused. It's weird. Like when I first started handicapping New York racing, it felt easier. It felt like the money was not as smart as it is today. And I feel like I don't want to give like people like me too much credit, but I mean, I feel like there are a lot of really astute handicappers that write about New York racing, and it just feels like the play there is a lot more sophisticated than it is on other circuits. It's really hard to find value in New York, and I just for me personally, handicapping the races, it's really a lot harder to find opportunities that match your opinions, or at least the opinions that I put out there publicly. It's really difficult to find value here. So I do sometimes think like, would it be easier if I just kind of like totally switch things up and try out a different circuit? I mean, I'd like to do the experiment at some point, but I don't know if it's going to happen right now.
I don't think Mahoning Valley handicapper David Aragona has quite the same ring to it.
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know. Got to make that a thing.
The morning line thing is really interesting, I think, because you kind of have to separate your own opinion from what you think the public is going to do. Like, is that hard for you? Like, or are you able to separate those two things?
When I first started doing it, I thought it would be harder than it actually was. But it really is kind of like just turning off that side of your brain and like saying, okay, my opinions don't really matter. It's just like basically an exercise in paying attention to what happens on the tote board. And the biggest homework that I did, and I still do for making the morning line, is just kind of like sitting in front of the TV and watching the tote action and taking note of which horses take money, which horses don't, what was I right about, what was I wrong about. Because a lot of the times the trends that you see on the tote board and the wagering, it doesn't really follow things that you think should be moving the money that much, but there are certain angles that a lot of people do put a lot of faith in that you do have to be aware of. So for me, I kind of have this repository of all these angles and like a kind of in a hierarchy in my head. And when I go through the races, you see which ones apply, and you just try to do your best to look at it through this the eye of like the public, in quotation marks. And then once I'm done, I'll go back and see what my opinions are. But I do try to make them two completely separate endeavors.
You know, you mentioned all the sharp money, the smart money that's in New York. I tend to agree with you. I think in general, it's very hard. But then you have the catch-22 of like, if you go to another pool, you play Turf Paradise, you make $100 win bet, you move the pool by yourself. So that's a little bit of an issue too. But like, it's been a big discussion and debate around the computer wagerers, and I think NYRA has done a very good job in kind of limiting them in certain pools. Do you think that that's something that needs to happen more across the board to make it fairer for the common horse player?
For sure. I mean, there are kind of two components to that. I mean, the first is just the general presence of the CAW wager, which I feel like it's not going anywhere right now. And what NYRA did, it doesn't completely solve the problem. I know that they have probably some more steps planned down the line to address it. But what they did with what you're referencing, like taking the CAW wagering out of the win pool, it does solve that immediate problem of appearances where a horse's odds are going to drop in half in the middle of a race. Yeah. Obviously, it's not because money's being bet during the race, but it's because so much of the play comes in the final seconds that you do have that slight delay. And the win wagering, it does really change at a lot of tracks. And I feel like NYRA has solved that problem, and it can give you a little bit more confidence betting into the win pool because you know you're going to be locked into a certain price with a little more confidence than you do at some other circuits. But in a lot of the other pools, that money is still there. Yeah. And it's difficult to beat. I mean, it's just like another layer on top of the takeout that's working against the average player.
Well, it's such a catch-22 for the tracks too, because they really want that money. Like they'd be moronic to like turn aside these millions of dollars in handle, but at the same time, you're going to drive away a lot of the meat and potatoes horse players if you don't do that. You know.
Yeah, and it's like walking this fine line between what people actually care about. Because I feel like the average player, they're not so much aware of why the odds are changing. They just know it's happening.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily know that they're losing X amount of dollars over this period of time because that money's in the pool, because basically a certain segment of the population is locked into, a certain ROI. It's going to affect how you do over time. I feel like there's not a widespread understanding of that, but there is that immediate understanding that, okay, I could have more confidence playing in this one pool because it's not happening anymore.
I got to ask you about this thing that happened. I don't know if you played on Sunday at Tampa. They had the pick 5 carryover. I'm sure you heard about it on racing. As a racing,
I saw some chatter on Twitter. Yeah,
yeah. as a racing Twitter stalwart, now I'm going to call you that. Why is it so hard for these tracks to get this kind of stuff? Not even get it right. Just don't get it horrendously wrong to the point where people feel slapped in the face. Like, what is the deal with that kind of thing? And just for anybody who doesn't know, the deal was there was a big pick 5 carryover at Tampa Bay Downs right before the start of the pick 5. They took the remaining races on the day off the turf. There were 3 turf races left. So basically disregarded everybody's handicapping and were scratching horses as the horses were loading into the gate for the 5th race. Like, why is this so hard not to screw up, David?
It's really frustrating. I do honestly feel like a lot of times it's not something nefarious going on, and it's just a communication break. It's a communication breakdown at the racetracks. A lot of times, the arms of the racetrack that make that decision are not necessarily thinking about the betting side of it, and that's a real problem. And I don't know
how is that possible, though.
I don't know if it's it's a simple training that solves that or what, but it feels like that has to be drilled into the minds of so many people that work in this industry that that's the primary concern, giving the people that bet on your sport the confidence that they have a fair chance. And when something like that happens, it does make people feel, whether rightly or wrongly, like the track is actively working against them. And you don't want to leave your customers feeling that way. I know with the specific situation, I don't know exactly what was going on with the weather. I wasn't following Tampa Bay Downs that day. I do know sometimes there is difficulty when races are taken off the turf and the timing of things. And if there's forecasted rain later in the day, some tracks want to preserve the wagering product in other pools and stuff like that. So I don't know the exact specifics of the Tampa situation. I'm not speaking to that. But it does feel like you have to come into that decision-making process with the bettors in mind, or else you're not doing your customers a favor.
Yeah, and it was like, I honestly was watching it. I didn't see a drop of rain all day. It might have been one of those things where the jockeys rode an earlier turf race and were like, there's lumps in the turf course or whatever, and complain. But either way, worst case scenario, you got to extend the post time 20, 30 minutes, give people a chance, And I think that this is especially bad when it comes to the increased availability of sports wagering. I think it's a big, big problem because, a lot of people talk about sports wagering being a threat to horse racing wagering. I don't think it's necessarily the new bettor that's going to go to sports betting instead of racing. I think it's the seasoned horse player that's going to get fed up with stuff like that and is going to move to play something else. And I personally, I told this story a couple weeks ago, and I'm sure this has happened to you. You ever been live to a single in the pick 5 and the horse is 6-5 on a David Aragona morning line and opens at 3-1 and you're like, I have absolutely no chance. That ever happened to you?
Oh, all the time.
Okay. So that happened and the horse didn't run a step and I closed my account and I bet sports the rest of the day. So I think, that wasn't anything like the Tampa thing. That wasn't just incompetence or nefariousness or anything. It's just one of those things that happens as a horse player where you feel like people know what's going to happen before the race and you don't. Yeah. I wonder what your thoughts are that. Do you bet sports at all?
No, I'm one of these people that's very focused on horse racing. That's my sport. I like some other Olympic sports. We can talk about that maybe another time. But
talk about it now. I saw you tweeting about the figure skating last night.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a figure skating nerd, so the Olympics are kind of an exciting time for me. But no, team sports and stuff like that, I really don't follow it. It's not my forte.
Gotcha. Yeah. So did you ever skate, or is it something you just enjoyed watching?
No, my mom was really into watching skating when I was a kid. She would like just sit in front of the TV and like bawl her eyes out whenever she saw Michelle Kwan. So I kind of like grew up watching that, and I had some friends in college. One of them was into skating, and a couple like to watch it. So I don't know. It just was like something that kind of stuck. And they have like a new scoring system where it's like really math based, and it kind of fascinates me a little bit. So I come at it from that perspective. It's also a sport that's like rife with problems and like political upheaval, so it's a little refreshing to take a break from racing and go to that at times. Yeah, no, that's my story with
So
that.
racing is the sport that's rife with problems. I was like, what are these figure skating controversies that I haven't heard about? Seems
Yeah.
pretty clear to me. And Nathan Chen was incredible last night. That was great.
Totally, yeah.
See him
That was
get
awesome.
that redemption in the Olympics. So let's talk a little bit about the problems in racing. I don't want to focus on it too much.
Sure.
But we got, first of all, I think the disintegration of the agreement between HISA and USADA, I thought, was a major blow in terms of racing cleaning itself up and getting all of its drug enforcement and drug policy under one roof. What was your reaction to that when you heard that news?
Yeah, I watched part of your writer's room with Travis Tygart and what was her name again?
NYRA.
Yeah, and that was so fascinating, and it kind of gave me some hope at that point in time. And I feel like the subsequent news about the communications breaking down, it's a little it's definitely discouraging. Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly where this is going. I'm hopeful that there's going to be some kind of agreement reached or some alternate solution, because it does feel like that was going down a path that racing really needs to address. The uniform rules, certainly, and the testing component, especially. Yeah, I mean, you probably have better insight into what you think might happen with that. It's not something like a beat that I'm following every day, but it's something that's so long overdue in racing, because I mean, not only do you have the inconsistencies from state to state, you just have this general lack of transparency, and so many of these racing commissions have just like gotten into this habit of being as secretive as possible, dragging their feet. You never know, like, if anything's actually going to happen, if like a medication positive is ever going to be reported.
Because you're referring to something specific, but I can't imagine what it is.
I mean, only because it's happened recently, but I mean, you could go back 5-10 years and like, it's the same thing that's been happening forever. I think there's probably a little more scrutiny applied to it now because there've been such high profile cases in the past couple of years. But this kind of thing's always been happening. So, I mean, things do need to change, but you really do need like somebody to step in and make some like drastic changes. And it just feels like HISA opened the door for that, but racing still needs to walk through it.
That's the whole thing. And that's, I'm not saying that this was going to be a perfect solution or that it was going to be without issues. I know there were a lot of concerns about the cost and how that was going to be distributed throughout the industry, which I think is legitimate. But, you know what a godsend it is that USADA is even interested in getting involved in a Mickey Mouse sport like ours. You know what I mean? That's just not the kind of thing that you would expect an industry with such, or like an organization with such credibility to want to get involved in the first place. And I think people just don't realize kind of what an opportunity that is. And I wonder if you feel this way, but my feeling is that it's just there. I think there are too many self-interested people that, it's the current status quo is working out for them individually, and they just can't see the forest for the trees. And they don't think of being stewards of the game and the greater health of the sport. How would you feel about that?
I mean, like another example of that is like this thing that the Jockey Club tried to do with the stallion cap, and like all these farms are like suing over it. I mean, it's anything that like the industry tries to do together in the best interest of the game. It's like people, the powerful players in this sport can't stop themselves from putting their own self-interest ahead of the future of the sport. And especially for some like a young person like me, and I'm sure like you who works in this sport, it's just so discouraging to keep seeing it happen over and over again. And, with the medication side of things, it's, what's going on with Baffert obviously is, it's a big problem. I feel like a lot of people come at it from the wrong angle by just, viewing the specific infractions around Medina Spirit and the other horses that, have come up positive over the past few years is like, the entire picture of what's going on in horse racing, when it's just like the tip of the iceberg. And, the overage of betamethasone is like that's not the medication you should be concerned about if you're concerned about doping in horse racing. It's the stuff that nobody knows about. And if you watched, again, I saw Travis talking about this on the interview you did with him. I mean, if you followed like track and field or other sports where doping is a huge issue, you know that there are biological, I don't know if medications is the right word, that just are untestable, and they stay in people's systems for a long time. And I mean, it only stands to reason that kind of stuff, it's been in other sports for so long. It only stands to reason that it's made it into horse racing. I don't know how sophisticated of a level, but I mean, I don't feel like there's a big awareness or even a big understanding that that's a frontier that needs to be come at. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm like throwing out a lot of like different loose ends here, but I don't know. It just feels like there's such a big obstacle to making progress on this front that it often feels too overwhelming.
Well, and you brought up the betamethasone thing. I think it's one of those things that kind of evens out, because I don't think the betamethasone thing I don't think that's why Medina Spirit won the Derby, obviously. I think that the stuff that they're testing for, I think Bob Baffert might be right, actually, that the thresholds are a little too sensitive for these tests. Sure. And that gets the big news. But the stuff that they're not testing, that they can't test for yet, that people are using and getting away with, that doesn't make news. But that's the problem. So I think, even if the smaller drugs get the big headlines, there should be a headline. There should be a headline in racing that we have a drug problem that we can't get under control.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you handicap the races and bet the races, you see it every day. These gigantic form reversals, especially in the claiming races, that are just unexplainable, and yet day after day, the tests come back clean, or so we're told the tests come back clean. It's just not reported. But I mean, a lot of that is due to the fact that you can't test for these things. I mean, the federal indictments from 2020, I mean, we always go back to that, but those were substances that those horses never tested positive for. I don't think we even still know how to test for those substances. We just know that they were medications that were being administered, and you don't know how widespread that is. That's the thing that, like, I'm really concerned about. And when I see odd things happening in racing, my mind keeps going back to that kind of stuff. And just to like cycle back to the Baffert thing for a minute, I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm not defending Baffert in saying that, like, I don't care about the betamethasone thing that much. I mean, the thing that gets me most upset about the Baffert situation, it's just going back to somebody powerful in the sport that doesn't have the best interests of the future of the sport in mind. Baffert's entire media tour afterwards, his recklessness with fighting all of these things. I mean,
David, it's cancel culture. That's the thing. Yeah. That's getting rid of Bob Baffert, totally.
No, what was reported in that Washington Post article that I'm sure most people read, that Baffert will never, ever, ever accept a suspension, and he will spend as much money as he can possibly on legal fees to get around a suspension. I mean, just that refusal to accept responsibility. I think that's why Bob Baffert needs to be, I don't know, I'm not the stewards. I get to make these decisions. I'm not the racing commission, but something needs to be, some penalty needs to be levied against Bob Baffert for what he's done to racing in the past couple of years. That's my opinion.
And it's not about this one thing. It's the totality of his record. He's had an opportunity after opportunity to play by the rules. And, whether you want to chalk it up to sloppiness or nefariousness, whatever, it's just there's been chance after chance to get it right, and he hasn't been able to do that. But again, it all goes back to not having the right cops on the beat. It's just, we're kind of left up to this self-regulation standard that just does not work for this sport with 33 different racing jurisdictions. And first of all, just the fact that he broke that news. He broke the news of the drug positive. That was like, in itself, was just like something you could never imagine in any other sport.
Who knows? Only would have heard about it otherwise, right?
Right. Well, because you can see what's going on with the KHRC, with the hearing or non-hearing, or yeah. So we don't have the right cops on the beat. So that's the root of all these problems, right?
Totally. I mean, I don't want to keep harping on the same thing forever, but like, it's just really frustrating. And I don't feel like I have the answers. I feel like there was, things were going in a direction that seemed somewhat hopeful with HISA being implemented. And now it seems very uncertain. And, just the uniform medication rules and people knowing that they had to follow a specific set of guidelines. I feel like that could go such a long way. I mean, the whole testing component, it's very difficult to implement that. I'm sure there are monetary concerns in a lot of racing circuits, but having those uniform rules in place, it would be such a good step in the right direction. You just hope we can get there.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where like you want to like shake people and be like, do you not see what the rest of the public sees right now? Because it's just so easy to be it's like a very insular game. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
Like there are just so many people that are like, well, all my friends are in racing and everyone says it's going great. It's so easy to just kind of brush it out aside. But guys like you and I who don't really have racing friends outside of the ones we've made through our jobs, it's easier to see what the layman thinks about racing. And it's unfortunate. You're passionate about the sport, which we are. It becomes one of those things where it's like you can't save a sport that does not want to save itself a little bit. You can only do so much. And we try on the writers' room, like we try to bring these issues to light. And I think that's one of the reasons, honestly, the show has become popular is that, there aren't that many people talking about these things in racing. And I think that there is an appetite for that kind of thing. But yeah, what's a broad sense that you get from people outside of racing? Like, what do they think?
Obviously, when the Kentucky Derby positive came out last year, everybody who knew that I worked in racing, like that's the first thing they ask about. The same thing happened with Medina Spirit's death at the end of last year. That was the story that people were aware of. And it gets really frustrating when people's only awareness of your profession is like the most sordid stuff that comes out into the mainstream. The Bob Baffert SNL skit. I mean, you could just keep going backwards in time, and it's just like
which was absolutely great.
It was funny, but
but it was great.
But you almost weren't. At least me personally, I wasn't ready to laugh at it at that time because it just all was it was like a fresh wound that keeps getting reopened.
Right.
And you could just keep going back through the past year, and it's like a greatest hits list of just negative stories about racing. And I'm not one of these people that thinks you have to dig up positive stories to counteract the negative narrative. That's not what it's about. All these negative stories are coming out because there are so many problems. And to make positive stories, the problems need to be addressed. You shouldn't sweep them under the rug to kind of throw a party on top of it. That's not how you fix horse racing.
But that's another reason that we're kind of screwed by not having a central governing body or even a central public relations unit of some sort, because I think there are positive stories. Handle is up, which I want to ask you about. Breakdowns overall are down in the last 10 years if you look at the Jockey Club study. So I think that there are positive stories that you can push back with, but you need that body to push back. You need hire some fancy pants PR firm to do your PR. Like if you're the NTRA, you know what I mean? We had Tom Rooney, who's the new NTRA chief, on our show, and I asked him that. I was like, can you do anything to push back on these negative narratives? And he said yes, and we'll see how that goes. But that's another thing where it's a real deficit for racing not to have that central voice, don't you think?
Totally. When a real negative story like that breaks out into the mainstream, it's like nobody knows who to turn to. Right. I mean, there are a few respected journalists and writers, but beyond that, there's nobody that's in that high position of authority nationally that can come out and say something. It's just this chorus of people that gets really muddled and they end up bickering with each other. And then it just ends nothing gets solved coming out in the mainstream media. I mean, I have one person who's close to me who's kind of been getting more interested in horse racing recently. And he's getting a little bit into the betting and handicapping side of it. And he's just gotten introduced to racing really in the past year or so and got into it way more during the pandemic when there was not a whole lot else to do. And he'll just say to me every so often, how do you deal with all these negative stories that keep coming out all the time? It just seems like there's nothing ever positive coming out of your industry. It just must get so frustrating. And it's true. It does.
But we're going to talk about the rising handle because that is a positive story. There's been a little bit of debate about, how much of that is the computer wagerers and how much of that was just a function of the COVID boom where everybody was home all the time. What are your feelings? I know that you're not privy to the data necessarily, but what's your general feeling about, where that handle increase is coming from?
I mean, I've seen a few smarter people than me like talk about this online and stuff like that. And I mean, a couple of the points that caught my eye are one of the things you mentioned. I mean, just the phenomenon of the pandemic. And it wasn't just during the stay-at-home period. Even today, there are still a lot of people that are choosing to work from home when they didn't before. I feel like I'm one of them. I almost always work from home these days. I used to go to the track so much more, and I don't anymore. Yeah. It's just kind of gotten comfortable doing what I did for the past year. But I mean, I'm not like a typical case of that. There are a lot of people that used to work in an office that now just kind of transition to work from home because they like it better. And it does give a lot more freedom. And I'm sure people can follow the races a lot more. I've seen even people that I follow on Twitter who used to take the week off now tweeting about the races on a Wednesday. I mean, I'm sure they're working, but like they're also following that. So I do think that the stay at home component definitely has to have had an impact on handle. As far as the CIW money goes, I don't really know. I mean, it's always been mysterious. Does it really stand to reason that there would have been a sharp uptick in CIW money over the past year? What would be the reasons for that? I don't know. That seems like it should be fairly constant over time. Like that's been really well honed at this point, or you would think it has been
down with the NYRA, restrictions, right?
That too. I mean, there are more reasons why it should be going down than going up. So yeah, I do feel like something else is going on. I don't know what all the factors are. I'm sure it is a multi-factor explanation, but the world has changed a lot in the past couple of years. So I guess it stands to reason that the way people behave with their money, that could change too.
Yeah, and that's I think that's like something we're really holding on to is these positive handle numbers in the last year. So we'll see what happens this year as like maybe we transition back to normal. I also wanted to ask, have you ever done a handicapping contest? Has that ever been an interest of yours?
It never really. I tried it like maybe 10 years ago. It never really caught on with me though. I mean, it's a completely different kind of strategy than betting pari-mutually. Right. I mean, obviously there's a pari-mutual component to that, but it's a very, it's a different kind of strategy to approaching the races. It's way more, or at least from my perspective, it's way more about betting in a way to beat other people than about the handicapping side of it. Betting, offensively or defensively, that kind of thing. And it's so much about kind of being right on the day as opposed to being right over a period of time, right. Like trying to bang out that decent ROI, which is what I get so focused on. Maybe it's not that. It's just a different way of looking at the races. I mean, I take my hat off to people that are really interested in that. That's awesome. I mean, another kind of pathway that people can get interested in horse racing. I mean, it's great for us. It's never been something that, I've been itching to do, but who knows? Maybe I'll learn more about it in the future and that would change. Maybe I'll hook up with somebody that like convinces me otherwise, but it's not something that I've done a lot of in the past 5-6 years.
Well, it's also one of those things where, I don't know, maybe I'm just not a good enough handicapper, but you really got to stick with it. It's just, unless you can qualify on like your first try, you really got to stick with it like day after day. But you mentioned the ROI thing, like how you seem like a very smart math oriented guy just from talking to you. How much do you keep track of that for yourself? Like whether it's your public plays or whether it's your day-to-day individual plays, how much do you keep tabs on that?
Oh, I mean, I keep track of all of it. I mean, to different extents. I mean, with like the public stuff, I track it. Sometimes I hate doing it because it's going down the tubes. I mean, sometimes it's a pleasure. It depends on how your meet's going. But no, I mean, I always track it and try to see where I'm going wrong. Sometimes just go through a bad streak and you have to suffer that. But I try to keep on top of the public plays. It is really hard to be a public handicapper and crank out a positive ROI consistently. Putting out those picks 24 hours ahead of time, especially on a circuit like New York, the money is just too smart for that to work really well over a long term. But I do like to think that the insights that I put out and the picks that I give, they help people in other pools, multi-race wagers, that kind of thing. It just makes people think about the races in a different way, gives people angles to use. So I hope it's helpful. But correcting out that positive win ROI is really difficult. And from the personal betting side of things, I think it's essential to keep track of your ROI and see how you're doing, what kind of tracks, which tracks you do well at, what kind of wagers, that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, and I'm not sucking up to you just because you came on this show. I think you have one of the sharpest opinions out there, and you're one of those guys that when you have a highlight horse, I definitely take notice. But what's a typical day for you, like wagering wise? I'm assuming you're gravitating towards pick fives because those are the best value in terms of takeout. But do you do win bets? Do you do intra race wagering? Like, what's a typical day for you like?
To be honest, this is a pretty quiet time of year for me. I don't like Aqueduct is like a really tough meet to bet. A lot of the race cards are pretty thin. It's kind of hard for me to find stuff to write about at times because there's just not a whole lot going on. But when racing cranks up at other times of the year, I like to diversify. Pick fives, pick fours. I'm not really much of a pick six player, never have been. I did hit a nice one like years ago at Saratoga, but it hasn't worked out in the long term. But yeah, it really, for me, depends on what my handicapping opinions are and where I think the value lies. I don't necessarily like to come into something saying, I'm going to bet the pick five today. I like to look at the race card and say like, okay, my opinions are in races X, Y, and Z. How can I hook those up? Or which horses do I like? So what are the best bets to use in these situations to capitalize on my opinions, not so much trying to like retrofit my opinions to a specific.
That's so smart. Like that's one of my big problems is like I try to hammer out a pick five play just because I feel like it's such relatively speaking, it's such good value because you can always find 15% takeout. But yeah, I think that's one of the issues I have is like, putting in hundreds of dollars into a pick five play because I'm like, well, this is the best value. But you really,
And I think that's one of the problems that's been born out of the way racing is covered on TV. A lot of times you see, not to pick on one specific network, that's not what I'm looking to do, but like there's always this conversation about like, what's your pick five ticket? What's your pick six ticket? Who are you singling? And I feel like sometimes that leads people down the path of thinking like, I have to be this kind of player to make money. And it's not the case. You should do what suits you. You should look at what you've been successful at and build your strategy on that. You don't have to come into a day thinking I'm going to play the pick five at this specific track because everybody's talking about it. If your opinions don't really line up that way, find something else to play and you'll probably do better.
Yeah, and it kind of becomes a little bit of an obsession where it's like these things that you can get like 300 to 1 odds on if you hit a good pick five, but it's really more about cranking out a positive ROI, like you say. And also, this might be my last question for you. We'll see where it goes. But what's like a typical day for you outside of racing? Are you in Queens? Is that where you live?
I'm in Queens, yeah.
Queens? Mm-hmm. Like, what's a typical day for you? Like, you like to go out a little bit, or are you just really mostly staying at home studying the horses?
It depends on the day of the week. From like Wednesday to Friday, sometimes I barely leave the apartment because there are so many like deadlines to hit. That's like the busy time to get all that stuff out before the weekend. Right. But yeah, my typical day for me is got my morning line deadline in the morning. I try to I'm a bit of a night owl, so I'll stay up late trying to do all that work, going through the races before the deadline the next day. But I will try to get some outside time when I can. Actually, I've never been like that much of a gym rat or anything like that, but lately I've been trying to take up running and do a lot more like running outdoors, even in the wintertime. I actually signed up for my first ever half marathon in a few months.
Ooh,
so
when is it?
It's in April, actually, at Keeneland. So I'll be taking a trip to Kentucky.
That's
then.
Awesome. We're actually going to be, the writers' room is going to be at Keeneland in April as well. We're going to do a live show. Yeah. My friend.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. No, so like that's on the horizon for me. So
my friend did the New York City Marathon recently, and it made me feel like a total schlub. So thanks for
that. I can't say that I like it, but it gets me outside, and it does kind of like give you some time to decompress mentally and put you in a better mood. So there are some benefits to it, but it's not always fun while you're doing it.
No, running is like very monotonous to me. Yeah. And the only reason this was one of the things actually was born out of the pandemic was I got a Peloton, and that's just one of the things that it's like something about the music, like it keeps you focused. And even then, sometimes it's hard to walk the 10 feet in my apartment over to the Peloton. It's like the longest 10 feet of my life.
I know.
But it's having that little like slice of accomplishment during the day. I think that kind of really helps mentally as much as physically.
Yeah, no, I think especially with racing and the kind of job that I have, it's important to take some time to just mentally decompress because, you can get so immersed in horse racing. Like there's always something going on. And whether it's like the wagering side where like you're always chasing the next thing or like just the work that I have to do and all the deadlines I have to hit, like there's always something to do, unless like I take vacation time and actually like completely shut my laptop and turn it off. There's always something that you can get, that can catch your fancy. So I think it is important, like every week at a specific time, or each day, to like just take some time for yourself to do like a sanity check. I try to, especially like in the summer during the Saratoga meet, when like there are so many deadlines and I'm just like immersed in it all day long. It can be tough and it can really wear you down, and you have to stay on top of that.
Yeah, well, especially for a guy like you, I think, who wears a lot of different hats for sure in this business. I'm going to sound like a stalker right now, but I felt like you tweeted a while ago about getting a dog. Maybe was that a thing that happened?
I'm trying to think if I tweeted a dog picture. No, I don't think so.
I don't have a dog.
I do not have a dog. I don't.
I was going to use an excuse to show you my dogs. But yeah, I mean,
I love dogs. I might have tweeted a picture of my dad's dogs. Maybe I was like taking them on a walk. I forget, but yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's all I got, David. This was better than I could ever imagine, man. This was
this was awesome. I enjoyed this.
Yeah, I would love to do this again, or maybe come on your show, or you can come on the writer's room. Like that's, you're a guy that I honestly really do respect in the business, and I really appreciate the time and all the insights as well, man.
No, I love to read your guys' stuff you put out. You cover a lot of the beats in racing that I think a lot of the other papers and journalists don't necessarily touch upon, because there's so much else going on, so much to cover in racing. I appreciate the work that you guys do.
And this was the idea for this show too, is to eventually have it be in person. So maybe like up at Saratoga or something, we can go to a bar or something and just kind of revisit this. But this is perfect. So thank you once again to David Aragona for coming on the show. He was better than I ever could have imagined. I always wanted to talk to him and get to know him, and he was a terrific interview. Obviously, a really smart guy. I look forward to talking to him again in the future. I promised the Kentucky Derby future wager bet. Pool 3 of the Kentucky Derby future wager opens this weekend. I'll start with the caveat that I don't normally love giving out Derby future bets, because there's such a relatively high likelihood that the horse won't even make it to the starting gate to begin with. But if you're going to make one, you want a horse that you think will be either similar or hopefully better odds in the future wager than on Derby Day if they do make it to the starting gate. And I'm going to go with a bomb. I'm going to go with Command Performance for Todd Pletcher. He's an interesting horse because he still hasn't broken his maiden. He's run 4 times, hasn't won a race, but he's run big in a couple of big Grade 1 races. He was second in the Champagne as a 2-year-old. He was 4th in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and he hasn't started yet as a 3-year-old. So he's kind of a forgotten horse at this point, I think. He's going to be a huge price. He's going to be overlooked in the future bet, 50, 60, maybe even 70 to 1. Those are the horses you're really trying to bet, because if they do jump up and run big in a prep race, which I expect him to do somewhere between now and Derby Day, he's probably going to be more in the 30 to 41 range, or maybe even lower than that if he wins one of these races. He's by Union Rags. Union Rags won the 1.5 mile Belmont. So I think he's going to get better as the distances get longer as well. He obviously has a tremendous Hall of Fame trainer in Todd Pletcher. And I think he's just going to be one of the forgotten horses on this Derby trail until he runs big in one of the preps. So I like Command Performance, 50 to 1 or better for sure in the Kentucky Derby future wager. And thank you so much for watching the first episode of Bettor Things with Joe Bianca. Thank you so much to David Aragona for joining us. We'll see you next time.